update on the emollients lawsuit, as well as Director Eric Shaw to provide an update on our approach to the comprehensive plan. We will have a report out on out of school time and how we have transferred, developed the new regime, as well as a report out on the school attendance report that the state, the office of the, the office of the state super, I don't think this is on, the office of the state superintendent released last week. Let's try this one. Okay, this one's working. Let me also just say this week that we were happy to get started, and a number of council members have participated in our kickoff activities for the year of the Anacostia. At the beginning of the month, at the beginning, or I guess just a couple of weeks ago, we were at Kingman Island and the Heritage Islands, where I announced a investment in their preservation and educational opportunities. I was also with Council Member Evans and Allen at the Capitol Riverfront, which celebrated its 10-year anniversary of just outstanding achievement along the Anacostia River. And we continue to work with our special events task force in Major League Baseball in preparation for this year's All-Star game. We look forward to working with each of you on events celebrating Frederick Douglass, the Anacostia Park, and other activities related to the Anacostia. Also, on Thursday, we will help to kick off Black History Month in the District of Columbia with the release of some important information involving related to African American prosperity in our city, and we will do so at the Howard Theater, and we invite all to attend. Next week, we'll also be very focused on education and Education Week for us, and with a focus on several events around our schools. I also wanted to introduce our newest cabinet member, Eris Scales. Eris, we welcome Eris back to the District of Columbia. And Eris has been appointed the Director of the Office of Partnerships and Grants. You may know last month, Lafayette Barnes retired after 22 years of service to the District of Columbia, and Eris will become our new director. So we welcome Eris. So with that, we have a full agenda, and we will try to move the agenda along, and we are slated to end at 11. So I'll try to keep the agenda moving. But I want to turn to you, Mr. Chairman, for any opening remarks that you have and the update on the Metro Safety Commission.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good morning to you. Good morning to the Attorney General and colleagues, everybody else. I'm not very good at having long, extensive welcoming remarks, so I'll just say good morning and welcome. We have on the agenda the Metro Safety Commission, which is really just a brief report. I think the impetus for this was the fact that a week or so ago there was that derailment, and so some members asked what's going on with the Metro Safety Commission. The commission is the product of a compact that the District, Maryland, and Virginia have entered into. The appointments are in the process of being made. I think that Maryland and Virginia made their appointments, the governors made their appointments late last year. We have pending before the council 3 appointments. The mayor submitted 2, a member and an alternate, earlier this month, and I introduced last week the 3rd member. There are 2 members and an alternate. That's the final composition from the District of Columbia. We are going to have a hearing on Monday, February 5th at 11:30 in the morning, and if there's no controversy, then I will ask members to move forward with the appointments, the confirmations of the mayor's 2 nominations, and the approval of the appointment from the council on Tuesday at Tuesday's meeting. Once we have our appointments, as the district has its appointments, then the commission will be fully constituted, and it will begin the process of organizing I believe it has to adopt bylaws, it has to hire an executive director, and all that's expected to take a couple of months, at which point, assuming that everything goes well with the commission will be stood up, so to speak, and the Federal Transit Administration will back out with regard to its oversight. And we will have a fully functioning and hopefully a much more assertive and effective safety commission to oversee Metro Rail. So I think that's the short of it, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. Otherwise, I think the next item on the agenda is yours, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I asked Deputy City Administrator Kevin Donahue to talk briefly about the impacts of a federal shutdown on the district. And we certainly have to thank our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton for her work in ensuring that the district is exempted from being considered as a federal agency during a shutdown. But that does not mean that a shutdown doesn't affect us. And so I wanted to turn to Kevin for that presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. So for those of you remember 2013, we had a 16-day shutdown. At that time, then Mayor Gray had to declare all D.C. employees to be essential in order for D.C. to effectively stay open. The exemption the mayor talked about was passed by Congress in the wake of that, which separates the district budget for purposes of a shutdown from the federal budget. Now, what that means is that the mayor was able to keep D.C. open. What we do as we prepare for a shutdown is we ask each agency to look at what parts of its operation or what positions are funded by federal grants or federal funds. And we look at whether and when there would be an impact on services. I say that because when you have a short shutdown, like the one we had, there's effectively no visible impact to services. Our Department of Public Works does bring back leaf crews to send out to do recycling and solid waste collections for National Park Service trash bins, receptacles that are, from the standpoint of a resident or someone in the city, appear to be the city's work. And there's about 173 locations that they collected for on the one day that there was the shutdown for. When our agencies looked at some of the positions or functions that are federally funded, what we found is that for short shutdowns, there's really not going to be an impact. What we do see risk for is if there are long shutdowns. By long, I mean in excess of 30 days. We would run into some challenges based on the agency. Most federal funds are loaded into our budget for periods of time. So OSI might get it at the beginning of a school year. It might come in monthly increments. Our Department of Health has reimbursable grants, for example, in which at some point they would want to seek reimbursement for what they costs that they incur. But for short shutdowns, we don't see the kind of impact that we used to see in the district, and we're able to stay open. Now, as you know, there's a continuing resolution in place in the federal government that effectively funds the federal government until February 8th. We don't know what will happen after that. We may face the possibility of another federal shutdown. And if so, we'll do the same thing we did 2 weeks ago, which is to have agencies look at what potential impacts there might be. And the final thing I'll note is that while the D.C. was able to stay open, there's many businesses in D.C. Whose livelihoods depend on the federal workforce coming and being part of city life, particularly lunch places and businesses located near federal buildings that are impacted even from a one-day shutdown. So moving forward, as we face the prospect of additional shutdowns, we'll continue to do the planning we did for the one 2 weeks ago and look to see where there might be impacts. I don't expect there will be any. And if for longer shutdowns, if that were to occur, is something that we would provide you an update on if we see the need to supplement federal activities with local funding for some period of time. But that wasn't the case for what happened last week. And that's my update.
Other questions from members?
So just to put a final point on it, federal shutdown is not good for the district, even though that we can maintain our operations. The deputy city administrator noted the number of employees who are affected, hourly employees especially. They don't work, they don't get paid. And that's a concern. We also know that a number of our contractors in a prolonged, who are federal contractors, I should say, in a prolonged shutdown, they also would not get paid. Their employees, in turn, could seek from the district and make UI claims, which we were also prepared for. And I'm not sure, Jack, if the Transit Authority puts an estimate on when they are running full. You know, they're running their full level of weekday service, yet they have fewer employees who are paying to get on the rail and the bus. So those are all impacts. One day probably is not a big blip in anybody's bottom line, but we can see how prolonged that can affect us. We were also happy that most of the Smithsonians were able to operate because it was only 3 days and they could operate on their existing funds. But beyond that, they could close and send the message to visitors that coming to Washington they wouldn't be able to have the full experience. So I just want to put on it that while we can maintain our operations, the impact to the city is larger than that. So I think that you're up next, Attorney General, for a report out on the emollients lawsuit.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Chairman. Very brief report we'll give. First, I should note that this Supreme Court term, the October term, saw 2 OAG cases before the Supreme Court of the United States, one in which we won 9-0 on an important piece of criminal procedure. The other, we recently learned that we lost on a 5-4 basis, although I will tell you that legal scholars had us losing 9-0 on the 5-4. So the way we like to look at it is we got 9 for a win, and we lost. On the other hand, we got 4, but in total we had 13 Supreme Court votes versus 5. At any rate, that's to say that the office is really, really thriving. In particular, our Solicitor General's office continues to really outperform. I should note that recently a line attorney at the Office of Attorney General was just nominated and now is seated soon, in 2 weeks, to be a Superior Court judge, which is great, John Pittman. And then 2 other OAG lawyers were recently put on as magistrate judges. So we continue to see our good people get elevated. As to the emoluments case, that's another case that a lot of legal scholars panned. The reality is that we had an outstanding day last week, and we were happy that Betsy Cavendish and her husband joined and provided support. It was a great day in Maryland where the court was clearly receptive to the district and Maryland's arguments as to legal standing in the emoluments case. The emoluments is really all about the country's first anti-corruption law, which essentially precludes any federal officer, including the President of the United States, from receiving perks and monies from foreign sovereigns as well as domestic sovereigns. So we feel very good about that case. We're likely to get a ruling in the next several weeks, which could result in our going forward with discovery and then eventually arguments on the merits. I do want to assure the mayor and the council that we continue to focus, of course, on the everyday work of the city, certainly defending the agencies in court, and also going forward with our initiatives on juvenile justice, housing, consumer protection, and wage theft. This year, our focus is going to be really on expanding our efforts in regards to protecting seniors. And in that regard, I want to thank Councilmember Todd for having us out at his extraordinarily well-attended and robust senior citizens advocacy group. So we look forward to teaming with other council members to help protect seniors this year. Thank you.
Any questions for the Attorney General? So what's next in that case, Attorney General?
So what's next in the emoluments case is I expect the court to actually issue a ruling to announce whether the district and Maryland have legal standing to continue the case. I suspect that the court will rule in our favor, and then we'll proceed on with discovery, where we'll be able to get some information about the Trump Worldwide enterprise and, frankly, where they're getting their revenues from. So, yeah, hold on to your horses. It could get fun.
All right, very good. Okay, if there are no questions for the Attorney General any further, we will go next to a presentation from Director Eric Shaw, who leads our Office of Planning, to talk about our update to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan, of course, helps us plan all city services and growth for the upcoming years. This is especially important. I think most of you know that after many, many years of population growth, that we expect the district to hit 700,000 residents this year. And the comprehensive plan helps us make sure that all of our that we are best prepared to accommodate that growth and continue to enjoy a great quality of life here in the district. So let me turn to the director to talk about our two-step approach in updating the comp plan.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council and Mr. Chairman. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited about this. So I want to talk to you about the legislation that's been introduced by the mayor to the council for your consideration of the framework elements. As you guys know, I've had a chance to talk to your staffs and to the community and you for the past 15 months as this process has gone through. So I want to give you some context once again for what the framework element is, what we've done for the outreach, and then sort of the context for our two-stage approach. And so the comprehensive plan is actually a 1,000-page document that lists a number of policies, either through citywide elements or area elements, that define and list guidance for how we should grow and develop. The first chapter after the introduction chapter is actually the framework element, which provides the factual basis and context in which we are to view the other policies that go through. So of the 1,000 pages that our comprehensive plan is, the framework is 50 pages. And so when we started the amendment process and did outreach with you, DC is actually unique in any city that I've worked in, and I think throughout the country, in that the public is able to propose amendments to the comprehensive plan. And so we took that charge very seriously in making sure that we had community that was informed to propose amendments or also to comment. And so 15 months of outreach through office hours, through online materials, through ANC workshops, through workshops with staff, yielded something that we hadn't expected. We had 3,000 amendments from the public that were proposed. 3,000 as opposed to 200 amendments in our last amendment cycle in 2012. So that shows that we were very successful in getting the outreach out, and I will say this right now, in reviewing those amendments, they were all very thoughtful, and sometimes require some deeper analysis and some deeper reconciliation. But what we've realized is it's taking us a lot of time to get through that 3,000 amendment versus the 200 that we had proposed, and so we have looked at adjusting our approach to a two-phase approach for evaluation by the council and by the public to start with what we call the framework first. The reason for that is, one, that we only got 101 public amendments on the framework. In addition to that, the factual material that's being included actually has been vetted through a number of sources. So a lot of our demographic data comes from the State Data Center and from COG forecasts. A lot of the forces driving change, which are detailed, come from context statements from other plans that have been done. There's 26 that we're incorporating. And we just thought it was manageable and provided the proper context and approach for both the mayor and the council to go together as I evaluate the other 2,900 amendments with my staff. We do want to note right now that all the public amendments were put into an amendment report that has been posted online. Our thing is a recommendation to council for approval, recommendation with modification, which may have come from the Office of Planning, or recommendation not to approve by the council. So that's a report that was posted in addition to the red line document, which details the changes and incorporation of those amendments. So just to understand the elements of the framework element, there's forces driving change, which include the key conditions related to the evolution of the district, including land use, economy, transportation, and environment. It does our growth forecast as well around population, household, employment, and then also has land use categories, which detail and provide some descriptions as relates to the future land use map. So we are amending it based off of some materials that we've seen. So approved citywide and small area plans that have been completed since 2012.
Director, let me just ask you to slow down a bit on some of the terms that are being used. Just pause for a moment so everybody that's watching just has a better understanding of some of the planning terms that you're using.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so in particular, for the forces driving change, so we understand that
forces driving change.
Yes, so that was the one I saw that. The forces driving change there are a number of factors that impact the growth and development of a city. And that may be the transportation system, it is technology, it is changes in the demographic makeup. For example, has our city gotten older or younger than was anticipated? It is issues around technology and those different issues. So when we think about the changing city, the city is not changing just because of what's being built, but there's outside factors that influence that. So for example, we couldn't have anticipated Uber in 2012. Right? This whole smart cities thing, this new emphasis on resilience. And so as we think about how we want our city to grow and the impact that these outside forces have, we have to take those into account and to the context that we have when we're making decisions for the other policies. Excuse me. And so in that instance, as we looked at the amendments that came from the public and from these plans, we have proposed amendments in the red line along with the public amendments that do some new things. So for example, we have now incorporated an element around resilience. Our commitment to C40, climate change, sustainability DC, has now meant that we need a context of understanding about global climate change as a factor impacting growth. As I said, smart cities as well with autonomous vehicles and technology are factors we need to look at for our context. For our growth forecast, which is one of the key places, you guys, we know that we have grown faster than we thought we were going to grow, but we've also grown in a different way based off of policies that have been done. So we see a larger bump in our baby boomers. We have a series of older millennials right now, so our millennial population is getting to the higher end of the millennial age. And we see a big growth in the population under the age of 6, which we believe is attributed to a lot of the policies around investments in schools, quality, and livability. So that tells a story for us around families and accommodation of age-friendly DC, other contexts that are there. In addition to that, we've made a big effort to what we call do recruitment and retention, to talk about not just who's coming here, but to also provide an amendment provides greater clarity about who is here, the populations that are impacted, issues around wealth, issues around growth, and unique needs of populations. And then finally, for land use categories, is really understanding that we went through an 8-year process through the zoning regulation rewrite, but also we have had some court cases that have highlighted the need for some clarity in our land use descriptions, and we took that to heart along with the community feedback and proposed amendments to incorporate those amendments. And so what we have asked in the legislation that has been introduced, and I believe is going to be considered in March, is that we think this is important to have this framework considered by the council now for a number of reasons. So one is we believe that the administration and the council need to have a shared context for us evaluating the other 2,900 amendments that are coming in for consideration. The next is that this still allows for a new context of existing policies in the comprehensive plan if we are able to amend the land use descriptions, the population, and those forces. And then in addition to that, it provides greater clarity on issues that have been raised through court cases and through direction on making sure that we have better connections between policies on land use and growth within the district. And so with that, thank you.
So we just wanted to put some information out in front of the members, and that we have moved one part of our update now, and I think Director explains, and we hope that everyone agrees that it's good to have some agreement on those definitions so that we have a better basis to analyze the remaining proposed amendments. I appreciate that the chairman has scheduled a hearing, I think mid-March.
March 20th.
On March
In the
20th for further consideration of the legislation. Thank you.
Other questions from members? Robert?
Director, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your presentation, Director, the work that you and your team are doing on this. My biggest question and concern is when we look at forces driving change, I think one of the largest predominant forces in the city is affordable housing and displacement. So if you could talk us through why we include forces like the environment and the shared economy, but not things like affordable housing and displacement.
Thank you very much. We did update the narrative to discuss that as part of the demographic forces. And so, for example, we added language and the demographic changes to talk about the change of the central Washington area in particular, which 12 years ago had not seen the growth. So central Washington area includes downtown, includes 14th Street. And so we've talked about now, as the development has happened and we've seen demographic changes, the impact on the change in rents and the impact on home prices. I think we pull out the Shaw neighborhood in particular. And so we list, we talk about in particular some of the issues around wealth gap between different populations within the city. And so it is raised, and we use the term displacement and gentrification and building upon narratives that were in the 2006 plan, but also we do build out that narrative in the demographics part of the amendments that have been proposed.
Alyssa, did you have your hand up? Charles?
Thank you, Director Shaw. What I was going to ask, could you help, I think that being able to talk about the context of what the framework plan is and how it works is going to be important to our communities. And so I was going to try to ask you if you could, we just went through with your office the Southwest Small Area Plan, for example. It's about a 1.5 year long process. I think it really helped shape and lay out a vision for how we're both preserving and protecting the great things about Southwest, but also helping chart where that growth is going to happen, how we help prioritize resiliency and environmental issues in green space. It speaks to how we're protecting housing. It speaks to how we're going to grow our housing. How does as we talk to our communities about what we're going through here at the council, can you use that as an example, the Southwest Small Area Plan? How do you talk to the Southwest neighborhood, for example, about this fairly exhaustive process we went through that yielded a really great plan that the community bought into, and how does that get reflected within the work that is about to come before us?
That's a great question. And so I think that there's two pieces for that right now as it relates to the Southwest plan, is that we've been trying to remind communities that there's been 26 plans that have been done since 2012. And that a lot of the planning that has been done, those plans are being incorporated. So we are making sure now that the planning work that we've done since the comp plan was amended last reflects that. So I think that's the first piece. I think that we understand that our city has changed and grown, in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And I think it's really important for us to be able to break down that narrative and share how that growth has happened. So in some instances, the framework is working at the aggregate, is working at that level. So the area elements and the citywide elements will go deeper into those policies, but there are breakdowns around the the change that's happened based off of area element. There are maps that showcase where we've seen development patterns grow and how places have changed. And so I think that this sparks a baseline and dialogue about the nature of change in the district since 2012. And it's an ongoing conversation.
Why don't we, I think what might be helpful for the members is to look at those smaller documents, I guess small area plans, retail studies, the planning documents that have been produced since 2012, and we can come up with a chart that shows how they'll be reflected in the update. That would be helpful. Okay. And I also think I want to commend OP for this kind of the second slide here, and we could build out some meat around the bones, I think, Director, that just really explains that these are the components of the update. We're talking about the first box that you will consider in March, but just so everybody understands who's watching and as the council members go out to the neighborhoods, this is really what makes it up, and we could use some maybe just quick definitions on the rear of this slide that explain what all of these things mean, the area elements, and then I think perhaps how the small area plans will be incorporated. I think that will be a good document for the public.
Councilmember Silverman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director, and I appreciate the mayor's deliberateness in trying to spell this out for the community, and so I'm just going to tease that out a little bit more. On the process, I'm a little confused what a framework amendment would be. Can you give an example, and can you explain a little bit more again the process? So we had 3,000 amendments submitted by the public, maybe 1,000 of them by Chris Otten, perhaps. So you reviewed, OP has reviewed all of those amendments and incorporated some. So what happens to folks who don't see their amendments incorporated? Then do they have another bite at the apple when the council has its hearing, perhaps?
Thank you very much for that process. So we are still reviewing the 3,000 amendments. There's multiple. So on the website plandc.dc.gov, we have a flow chart that shows the amendment review process.
Okay.
So there's a vetting for legality, for in line with best practices, for in line with existing policy. So we're in the process of vetting those right now. We do have a breakdown on our website also of who proposed the 3,000 amendments, and a large portion of them came from the community, from ANCs as well. So the process right now is that for the amendments that were proposed right now in the framework, we have posted on... Sorry.
Can you give an example of a framework amendment?
Oh, yes. So a framework amendment... top of my head. I'm drawing a blank. Well,
Let me jump in. I mean, early in the bill that's pending is revisions to the language regarding the population of the city.
that's correct.
That's very basic stuff.
Right. So that would be an Office of Planning amendment. We did have some amendments that said from the public, please address affordable housing stronger. That's one that came up. And so some of them came up not as amendments but as comments. Or some of them came up with language, and if that language did not work specifically as an amendment itself, the spirit and intention of that was incorporated either in alignment with other policies or incorporated as part of the narrative of the city, as narrative that was proposed by the Office of Planning. But we have the 100 amendments that were proposed are listed on our website as a report specifically that has a recommendation for council's consideration, if there's an ANC amendment with it, and our determination.
So just to follow up, so the framework is really the variables in the equation of like our planning for things like population, housing prices, things like that.
That's correct.
Okay, got it.
And the big buckets
Yeah.
are listed on one of the slides, the forces driving change that we discussed,
Okay.
what transportation changes have happened, technology changes and the like. Then another bucket is growth forecasts, and a final bucket is land use categories.
So we did get one amendment on, for example, incorporating autonomous vehicles into the transportation forces driving change, and have some language around how to articulate the role of autonomous vehicles as a force driving change within transportation. That was one that we received.
Okay.
Councilmember White?
Yes, very interested in learning about how to deal with 3,000 comments or proposals to amend something, because one probably affects something else. So I don't know, and not that you have to explain it now, how you categorize what is highest priority versus another person's suggestion, how that affects another thing. But today I wanted to talk about housing, and affordable housing more specifically, because I know even in the last administration we talked about spending $100 million in affordable housing. And so this administration, in 3 years, going on 4 years, so you're thinking about $400 million, half $1 billion. Have you all taken that into consideration, how we've been successful with that or have not been successful with that, and how does it affect the plans going forward and creating more effective zoning going forward, creating plans for DC?
Well, I think that's a good question. I appreciate that. So I told you in the forces driving change, in the demographics, we do talk about the communities, but also there is a new section that we've included called Investing in an Inclusive City. And in particular, it relates to capital budgets and city investments in schools, in roads, in housing, and it lists a trajectory and intention of tying the framework and the policies to our city investments. And so in that instance, not only schools, but also other investments that relates to roads and housing is included in that. I think that's 228. If you look at, and there's a series of statements in the narrative that talk about that specifically.
And what we would be looking to ensure, council member, is that, and like you mentioned, the $100 million commitment that we've been able not only to budget, and I want to thank the council for your support, but get out the door over the last 3 years. We think in the next 5 years that the processes are becoming more efficient. The affordable housing development community is becoming more efficient. And so while we've been able to deliver 5,000 units in 3 years, we think in the next 5 years that number will actually be doubled to 10,000 units. So we want to make sure that this plan can accommodate throughout in all 8 wards of the city at least the creation of 10,000 new units. So we'll be looking to do that. The second thing that it will allow us to do is, you heard the director say that where there has been some ambiguity about land use definitions that have been successfully challenged in the courts, we think that this clarification in the comp plan, and especially in the framework part of the comp plan, will provide that clarity. So some of the units that are actually been held up because these developments haven't started will be able to get started, and those affordable units will be delivered.
I wanted to also add to that, because what I'm noticing is that a lot of the units that are being built are 1 and 2 bedrooms and very few 3. And as a result, when we talk about it feels to me that we're recruiting a lot of people to come to DC who may be young or single, but in time, I know in my community, a lot of our families have large families. And so we're feeling the pressure of where do we send our families, even when we talk about the construction of new housing units. For example, Berry Farms, the units inside their property are getting smaller and smaller, so people are trying to figure out where are they going to go. And then those millennials are one day going to have babies as well. So as I ride down 295, I look towards the southeast part of the southwest corridor by the stadium. I notice all these buildings going up, and I'm trying to figure out how big are they? Are they going to accommodate families, or are they just for, single people lost and things like that? And so I wanted to know from you, what are your thoughts around that as far as affordable housing, the plans going forward?
Well, I'll just reiterate that I think that the demographic information that we've seen do reflect the idea of families. So once again, we see an aging of our millennial population, and we see a growth in the population under the age of 5, which tells us that we are seeing people having kids. I think that and having this updated information provides a stronger context and makes a stronger case for how we evaluate the existing housing policies now, which I think is strong. So
I think what the director said is you're right.
yes.
The data confirm what you are observing, and we expect to reflect that in this document, which will help us all as policymakers and budget makers make some different decisions.
There was another hand up. Ken.
Usually I get overlooked when you're sitting this close to the chairman, right? As a matter of fact, Madam Mayor, I wanted to touch on the aspects of the framework, and you sort of answered my question. I wanted to talk a little bit more. Alyssa had mentioned an individual who perhaps has filed a number of amendments, but has definitely filed a number of appeals, and has slowed down the production of thousands of units of housing, both market rate and affordable. And you mentioned in your remarks on the comprehensive plan framework that this district is still growing. We're soon to reach 700,000 residents, and I wanted to just underscore the importance of making sure that we are meeting the demand of housing as residents continue to move to the city, and residents who are here look for new housing. In that respect, you mentioned that the framework has taken some steps to address some of the issues around density that may have been confusing and may have led to some of the prior court decisions affecting some of the planned unit developments. Is there anything else, Director Shaw or Madam Mayor or whomever else, that the city should be looking to do to ensure that when these projects, these planned unit developments, are supported by the community, supported by advisory neighborhood commissions, have received a favorable decision by our independent zoning commission, and yet are appealed and delayed, and in some cases slowing down, again, thousands of units of housing in the city, which I think has a negative impact on the cost of housing overall in the city. Is there anything else that we need to do beyond what's in this framework? Should we expect anything else in the other submission of the comp plan, or should the council or us together be looking to do something else that addresses that issue of the appeals? Because we still have several projects that are being held up in the courts.
Well, we think that this is a great first step. As I mentioned, I'm happy to hear from the Attorney General. Actually, this is kind of a second step in some of the things that we've been involved in. I think you know that we have convened a number of our staff, land use attorneys, the Attorney General's office. We supported the addition of a new general counsel at OP to make sure that the policies that we have enacted are reflected in the staff opinions that the Office of Planning provides to the Zoning Commission. We've also worked to ensure that the Zoning Commission is properly represented at all of the hearings so that the opinions that they issue are reflective of all of the testimony that has been provided. We also, and as is represented in this framework recommendation, noted from a number of the opinions some ambiguity. And so we feel, and it may be helpful if the council helps amplify what the charter already says, that the zoning commissioner is the arbiter of conflicts with what an applicant might provide and what in what is in the comprehensive plan. The zoning commission should be that arbiter. I think it's also important that we all amplify the fact that citizens who have standing at the zoning commission shouldn't be overruled by an outside party. Somebody doesn't live in the neighborhood, is not achieving an actual harm, should not be really pushed out of that process. If a citizen or a citizen group takes the time to get standing and go appear before the zoning commission, there shouldn't be outside parties who really overtake what the citizens in their standing through the process. And so I do think that there is an opportunity for the council to weigh in on that aspect of ensuring that the citizen's voice is not diluted by someone with a totally outside agenda that isn't impacted directly.
I look forward to working with you and the Attorney General as well as the Chairman. He's agreed to hold a hearing on it to try to address that issue more specifically. To the extent it's not already addressed by the framework that you all have submitted. In Ward 5 we have a number of economic development projects that are still being held up, and I know we've got a lot of community members who are anxiously awaiting the arrival of the projects they've already supported in their efforts. The second part, if I could just ask about the amendments, the 3,000 or so amendments, Director Shaw, and get a sense from you if you all have analyzed those amendments and sort of categorize them by sort of geographic location, sort of the demographics around those amendments. One of the things that I've been concerned with, and I think the council has, I did a sense of the council resolution last year to really urge both the executive and our government in general, including this council, to look more specifically at the policies and the legislation that we put forward through a lens of racial, social justice, and economic equity, making sure that everybody in the city gets what they need to succeed and thrive. And I think when we look at 3,000 amendments compared to the, I think you said 200 or so amendments previously, where are all these amendments coming from? Who are they coming from? And who do these people represent? Whose interests? Are they individuals who are submitting amendments on behalf of themselves because they've been impacted by something that might find its way into the comprehensive plan? Do they represent the interests of organizations, either civic associations, ANCs, or ad hoc community organizations? Where are they coming from? And should we be looking at these amendments in a way that makes sure that they're inclusive in their impact to the extent they're included in any changes in the comprehensive plan?
Well, thank you very much for that, Council Member. So we do have an infographic that we have that breaks down where we got the 3,000 amendments, and they were largely from the public. I also just want to reiterate that in the framework right now for the demographic information, we really have made an effort to update the narrative to be more responsive and reflective of the differences in different populations and in areas. So we want to make sure that we understand not only for families, but in particular understand the needs of elders and the growth of immigrant communities and what that looks like, of African American sort of change within the city. So there is a more robust narrative about who is here and what have been the forces that have happened over the past 7 years that have impacted some populations in particular more, but also in the end to give the context needed for us to understand that we have more responsive policies to specific populations and to places throughout the district.
And is that information, can we find that on the website?
Yeah, so if you read the red line, you will see there's bold and underlined within the red line of the document that we've shared that shows all the new text that we have updated. It references particularly some information I shared for Councilmember White around community change in Central Washington, a breakdown of the African American community and changes in the African American community, in addition for immigration and Hispanic community.
Madam Mayor, I suggest we move on.
Yep.
We're going to get done by 11.
Sure. We have two final items, and I asked to include an update on out-of-school time. I know that our administration has worked closely with Councilmember Grasso and the Committee on Education around this issue, and I thought it would be helpful to have a quick update. And we will leave most of our remaining time to provide a report on OST's recent findings on attendance and graduation in the district.
Good morning.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor
Sorry,
Niles.
I'm just getting all of my things. We can jump right in.
Is your microphone on?
Is this on? Great. Great. I'm excited to tell you about the changes that we've made and the progress we've made about out-of-school time.
I'm not sure I hear you. Is that, let's just give that a tap. Yep. Okay. Just
Okay.
speak into it.
I'll just
Turn
keep it
up.
closer.
Okay.
So, as many of you remember, the DC Trust used to be in charge of the out-of-school time world, and it dissolved in April of 2016. With the help of our Deputy Mayor from Health and Human Services, wound that process down, and it moved over to the DME's office, especially because of legislation that our partner in all of this, Councilmember Grasso, put in September 2016. In February 2017, we were able to put together a setup team with one of our partners, the United Way, and then in October, we fully launched the office. We are restructuring the way that we are doing out-of-school time. The first is that we set up an office, rather than the DC Trust had 25 individuals who worked there, we are setting it up with 5 in our central office, and Mila Yoakum, who is our new executive director, I'm pleased to say actually led this work in Pittsburgh of creating a whole system for 4 years before moving here, so we're thrilled to have her. The other part of this process is a commission, and so we have 21 different members of the public, designees from government involved in the commission, and we're scheduled to have our first commission meeting shortly. And then instead of having everybody work in-house, we're tapping into the expertise that our nonprofits in DC have in a number of different areas for grant giving, for program quality and capacity and community engagement. And just to flag, in the program quality, we're excited because we've launched a new Institute for Youth Development at UDC as a component of this quality development that will be doing training for all of our out-of-school time partners. We've seen a number of improvements that we've been able to make, and I just wanted to highlight a few. One is we've actually been able to change the cycle of grants to make it work better for providers, which in turn work better for our families and students by moving the grant process up a number of months so that schools can, for instance, let folks know that they have after-school time available after summer school when folks are signing up for summer school and not learning that right before it all happens. The second one is we now are moving from we're dispersing the grants differently, so it's not based on a reimbursement, which was really difficult for our providers. We also improved the competition we've now publicly released the scoring rubric, we mandated training for the grant reviewers, and we actually send the scores to all of the providers because we know that will help them improve their quality. We also are trying some innovative things. One is that we set up a special grant program to promote having activities in 2 of our housing authority sites for this summer. In terms of, we've been really focused on equity, and we've done that in a couple different ways by engaging a number of folks across the city. We also have prioritized by geography to make sure that we are matching the supply of out-of-school time, which is both our summertime and our year-round programs, where our kids are and where our kids who are in most need are. In terms of the quality, I mentioned the Institute for Youth Development. One of the things we wanted to do was separate the professional development and the quality from the grant making so that those are not the same entity anymore. And we also have identified a quality assessment tool, and we have 22 sites piloting that quality assessment tool this year. Lastly, we've done an initial needs assessment, which is available on our website, and we're doing 2 more. And so that's helping us understand the universe of the students and their different, where they are in the city, what their needs are. Our next one is about what resources are available, both private and public. And then the last one is going to be surveying families and children. The outcomes, we have been really collaborative across all different, both agencies and different organizations. And I'm pleased that we've granted this year the after-school programs, 40 different organizations with $2 million serving 23,000 young people. And it lists a number of the other highlights from the work that we've done. What I probably should have done at the very beginning was not assume that everybody listening thinks about out-of-school time as constantly as we do in education. One of the critical things that we know when families choose schools and what they need to make sure that their students are getting what they need is to have a robust, not only fantastic school system, but having the robust after-school and summer experiences for their kids. And so we are working hard to create more coherence for families. I guess the other thing I will highlight is next week when we have Ed Week, we will be launching a website that will be family-friendly and that will list more than 150 different organizations so that they can go to find where after-school programming and summer programming is available. So we're excited to be doing a whole number of things to be moving our system of out-of-school time forward so that it really can complement what our schools are doing and provide for our young people and parents in the city.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for that update. I just want to say quickly to this issue that I really appreciate the partnership that I also have with Councilmember Nadeau in the Committee on Human Services. We introduced this together and kind of it has evolved over the time. And to my colleagues as well, because we had good hearings, we engaged in working groups, and we got to this point. I also want to note that it needs to be funded more, and I'll just put this on the table. It's not quite at $5 million last year, and as we gain more credibility with this work, and I think we had a pause there for a minute for good reason, but now we see that we're really building this program, and the reason why we need to invest more dollars in it is because it is directly linked to the work that we're doing on attendance that we're going to be talking about here in a minute. And that if you have a robust, strong after-school program or summer program which comes out of this work, then what you have are students that are more engaged, and you spark the love for learning a little earlier maybe in their lives, and it's easier then for us to encourage them to come to school and support them to come to school. So it's important that we continue to make these links between all the work that we're doing to tie back to the big question right now on the table, which is how do we convince students that school is a positive place to be and to engage in learning in a positive way. So thank you for this update. I really look forward to working with you on this in the committee for the next year or so, and certainly through the budget process.
Brianne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for this update. And I want to commend the out-of-school time team and your team for the way that they've tried to remain so true to the spirit of the legislation that created this. So first, I want to say that. Second, having gone through a cycle now, we were able to provide some feedback. And one of the things that I want to highlight from that conversation to make sure it has gotten to you is we need to also find a way to prioritize through the rubric cultural competency and organizations that are headed by people of color that serve children of color, because that's a really special nexus in our community. And we need to be thinking about how we weight that and value that as we're looking at applications and organizations that are serving, and how those organizations have historically served our children in a way that has been incredibly meaningful and has helped them on their path. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. Your team was very receptive to it, and as was the OST team, and so we want to just keep pushing on that. Thank you.
Charles?
Thanks. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I had two questions that have been coming up as concerns related to out-of-school time that I wanted to ask either what are we doing around them or what can we do? First is that I guess in recent weeks I've had a number of parents from especially Title I schools that have talked about our aftercare out-of-school time ending about 2 weeks before the school year ends. That's putting a really big crunch on working families and their ability to balance work and school. And then in addition, we have I'm also hearing that that's not going to start back up, our aftercare, until about October 1st. So that leaves us with about 5 to 6 weeks of the new school year without that aftercare, which again, really hits on our working families pretty hard. So I wanted to ask, one, why is that? And what are we doing to try to address that? Secondly, what type of work are you able to do in terms of your partnership with DPR and other programming so that in that August and September month, there are other ways to try to help fill the gaps? Especially, most of the summer camps end about 2 weeks before the school year begins. I think part of that is because of getting the schools ready, physically making sure that the school building is ready for the first day of school. But again, that leaves a lot of families in the lurch with that gap from being able to have the programming and the space to be able to utilize.
Sure. On the first point, that's under discussion. It's not. We have, as you may know, that there are two huge sources of public money for out-of-school time. One is the money that goes through the out-of-school time office. The other is TANF money that goes to our LEAs. And so those programs that you're speaking of have to do with that other source of money. So I think that we need to get back to you on what the plan is, that we need to address that.
That would be great. I would say the communication seems to be going out to parents, telling them it's not going to be there during that time. So at least the reflection I'm getting from parents concerned about it is it's not a decision that's in flux and could change, but it's one that's been made already.
Okay. I'll get back to you today on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And sorry, the second question.
Second question had to do with the benefit, I think, of your position to be able to help work with education and Parks and Rec with that gap that's going to take place as we prepare our schools for opening day, that in many of our summer camps and the places where families need their kids to be able to have that continuing activities and education for about 2 weeks or so, what are we doing and in what ways can we further strengthen that partnership with DPR and other programming to help fill that gap?
First, you may know that DPR stepped in and had created another week of summer programming for our for 5 different schools last year in concert with our extended year programs. So I will look at, we can look at all the different ways. Thankfully, our cluster is working really collaboratively together to tackle questions that come up and issues. And so let me follow up with you on that.
Okay, thank you.
So no other questions. Why don't we move on to the next item?
May I ask one question, Mr. Chairman? Be brief. To what extent do organizations like the Boys and Girls Club continue to fill a needed void in the out-of-school time? And I wonder about that because I care about their financial viability. And to the extent that there are questions about financial viability, what are we doing as a city to be supportive or not?
In terms of the Boys and Girls Club, they received one of our largest grants as part of the process for the for the after-school program. So they are one of our candidates who received that. And we can speak further about any other questions you have about that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So let me now introduce Superintendent Kang, who will provide an update on the reports that she commissioned around attendance and graduation rates in the district. And then Chancellor will be among us as well is at the table, actually, to provide a update on the immediate steps that DCPS needs to take to ensure adherence to our policies. Before I turn to the superintendent, I do want to say that we have concluded our investigations. We announced over the last couple of weeks staff changes that we have made in response to the findings. The chancellor has also been working throughout this time on the training changes that need to be made at the school level and in central office. And we still have a lot of work to be done around making sure that our technology and training and controls centrally and at the school level will ensure that all of our policies are met. That's one part of the work that we have to do. The second part of the work that we have to do involves the entire community, and that is making sure that kids are in school. So all of the investments, of course, that we have made and the things that we will need to do to ensure compliance with our policies are certainly one step in that direction. But we are all challenged to make sure that we are improving attendance and having kids be able to take advantage of those incredible investments. So let me turn to the superintendent, and then I think we will just go right into the chancellor's remarks and then answer questions.
Thank you, Mayor. On December 1st, 2017, the mayor directed OSSI to conduct an independent analysis of student-level attendance and graduation outcomes at all public high schools in the District of Columbia. And OSSI used 3 different methods to complete this review. First, we conducted an analysis of citywide attendance and graduation rates at all public high schools, both DCPS and public charter schools, which was conducted by OSSI staff. Secondly, we did a review of PCSB's oversight of public charter high schools. PCSB, the Public Charter School Board, has extensive oversight procedures that they already use around graduation in particular, and so we conducted a review of how the Public Charter School Board conducts that oversight. That was also conducted by OSSI staff. And finally, we worked with an outside firm, Alvarez & Marsal, to conduct a review of DCPS high schools, including Ballou High School. The interim report from Alvarez & Marsal was delivered to OSSI on January 12th and shared publicly on January 16th. And the final report from Alvarez & Marsal on all DCPS high schools was shared yesterday. All of these reports, both the ones conducted by OSSI staff and the ones by Alvarez & Marsal, are available on OSSI's website if you go to ossi.dc.gov/graduation or from OSSI's homepage. We have issued these reports as they become available, given the urgency we feel in the timeline to best make changes that can positively impact our currently enrolled students and their outcomes. So today I will focus on the results of the final Alvarez & Marsal report on all DCPS high schools. What Alvarez & Marsal found at the system-wide level, meaning the DCPS-wide level, was first that credit recovery is used at most DCPS high schools in contradiction to the LEA level policies. Second, that attendance policies, particularly those related to grading, were rarely followed across DCPS high schools. Third, that there was a lack of support and oversight from DCPS central office on most of these policy violations, both regarding credit recovery and grading and attendance. And finally, that most DCPS high schools exhibited a culture of passing and graduating students. The specific nature of that culture differed from school to school. The specific levels of whether it was more focused on just support for students and offering them multiple opportunities to more direct pressure from administrators. And the report goes into school-specific summaries that talk more specifically about the culture at various schools. In total, policy violations were seen in 937 of the 2,758 graduating students' records, and they were found in nearly all schools. That is 34% of the graduating students from DCPS last year. In addition to those specific findings, there's one particular other finding and observation that Alvarez made that we thought was worth noting. In particular, while they were conducting interviews with teachers and central office staff, they heard some reports of potential changes to attendance records that would result in improvements to the reported attendance rates. And so they looked into the total number of period-level attendance record changes. These are cases where a teacher had marked a student to be absent for a period, and those records were later changed to say present for that period. And there was one specific school that was an outlier among all the high schools they examined, where more than 4,000 changes were made to the attendance records for 118 graduates. The report goes into the total number of changes that were made at each school, but this one school was a significant outlier. The next closest school had fewer than 1,000 changes. So Alvarez and Marcel made a number of recommendations at the system-wide level. First, to improve DCPS central office's oversight and enhance accountability at high schools. Secondly, to provide additional support specifically around improving the consistency and accountability of credit recovery at DCPS high schools. Third, to improve policies and procedures governing attendance, grading, credit recovery, and graduation certification. And finally, to enhance systems and supports to improve consistency and accountability. And this was referring in particular to data systems and technology that would make automated reporting more feasible, both at the central office and the principal and teacher levels. With that, I'll turn it over to Chancellor Wilson.
So good morning. Hopefully I can manipulate this microphone here. Okay, so we have simultaneously been doing some reviews here in DCPS as well while the OSTI review was taking place. A number of issues were found. I'll share those issues here today. And then also what we are doing to address the concerns, as well as ensure that our students are getting the education they deserve. And so I just start here with our vision statement in terms of what we're trying to create, which is a district where students feel loved, challenged, and prepared. I think that's something that I want to highlight because we recognize that we aren't where we need to be. The vision is to say we need to get to this place, and our schools have to be places where students are challenged through rigorous and joyful learning opportunities in a nurturing environment. So I think that it's important to start there. And when we lifted up our strategic plan, we highlighted a set of common values. And I just highlight the value of excellence, which speaks to working with integrity and holding ourselves accountable for exemplary outcomes, service, and interactions. And we know through this investigation, through this work, is that we have not met our bar of excellence. We've not exhibited exemplary outcomes as relates to ensuring our students get the real-world education of having a grade reflect their commitment and engagement in school. So in terms of our internal review, it was led by our Deputy Chancellor, Wanda LeGrand, who began this school year in September. And it looked into all these areas, attendance and grades and credit recovery policy, graduation, in-depth review at Blue High School. So our focus was just primarily an in-depth review at Blue High School and the degree to which our schools aligned with our policies. And we found very similar issues to what was shared in the OSTI review. And primarily the challenge exists in all our comprehensive high schools. Most of our comprehensive high schools found the most struggle and was mentioned as relates to Dunbar what the challenges are. What we also learned through the process of this investigation, actually what became more clear, because I was hearing concerns since the beginning of the school year, was that we have a student information system. It's referred to as, it's called Aspen, that has not been set up to meet the needs of our students, to provide automatic notifications, and it's made it very difficult for schools to get period level attendance the way they need to. So it's not been configured to meet the needs of the policy. We also found that the supports provided by us in central office, the clarity with which schools were supposed to use the policy, training around credit recovery and grading was inadequate and completely insufficient to to get the job done, and in fact, led many teachers to believe that the alignment to the policy was unimportant, or they weren't aware of the policy at all. At Ballou, there was specifically a culture doing whatever it takes to help students pass, regardless of attendance. So some next steps that many of these we've already begun, and others will just be ongoing throughout the rest of this year into next year, is we really have to focus on the class of 2018, making sure they understand what the expectations are, that we are working with schools to ensure that the students get the classes that they need. Some of the students were never going to be able to graduate this year based on having a poor freshman year or sophomore year. Those students will be enrolled in summer school or be invited back to continue their education next year, whether they finish in 4 years or 5 years. We need to make sure that young people know that getting a diploma is worth their time. It certainly benefits them to do so. We also are focused on improving the policies for 18-19 as related to grades and graduation, creating high expectations, and then engaging our stakeholders. So specifically as it relates to our graduates for 2018, we have begun transcript reviews centrally. Now, schools should be doing this anyway. But what we've seen here is that what was happening was insufficient. And so the district has begun transcript reviews. We've done it in most of our comprehensive high schools already because they began to get kicked off here a few weeks ago. Trying to make sure students are in the right classes, getting the right information, so on and so forth, in terms of what they need in order to graduate. Also, the focus is just on making sure that we are providing clarity support to students, parents along the way. This is going to have to be done repeatedly, making sure they understand what the policies are, what the expectations are, and then we are in the process of hosting a set of resource fairs for families to help them getting the information they need related to our policies, or maybe even access to services that are available around the city, which may be helpful in terms of addressing challenges that students are finding in terms of getting to school. In addition to that, updating the policy as relates to grades and credit recovery. We intend to have those policies updated and improved by May of 18. So we expect to engage in a number of community conversations. We are first making sure, again, people are clear on what we currently have because it wasn't being implemented. But we also believe that both the grading policy and the credit recovery policy should be stronger, could be stronger. And so we're going to engage in that process. And then we plan to implement practices where we can regularly audit the grading, the adherence to the grading policy going forward. And then we have to improve the student information system we have to try to get it to do what it's supposed to do, what we need it to do, while looking into a way forward with a different system. That takes some time, and so we need to make sure that what we have is getting us there before we move on. Creating high expectations. This is work that we were uplifting in the graduate profile. In our strategic plan anyway, because we thought it was important to identify what a profile of a DCPS graduate should be, and begin our work in our schools to help students meet this profile. And so we'll define what it means to be a DCPS graduate, include the college and career milestones that are expected from all students in order to be successful after graduation. We will also implement some in-the-course assessments, beginning with the class of 2022, so it's incoming freshman class, that students will need to master as part of earning credit. We'll engage stakeholders to get input and feedback in terms of the things that we need to do around grading and credit recovery, as well as attendance and other things. And then we're working on creating an ombudsman-like function in our district, and look forward to sharing more about that in the coming days, and with the community as to who they can contact, and a process for investigations, and so on and so forth. I think that a few things I would love to close with. This is the timeline in terms of our next actions. I believe you may have a one-pager that spells out some things more specifically. I think one of the challenges for us is that we have students who, we have an expectation that when they graduate, that they are going to be ready for what comes next. And if students are going to struggle, we need them to struggle when they're with us. We need them to get the support while they're with us. And we also need to make sure that when there are challenges that educators feel to do the wrong thing, that they have an outlet that gets that information to myself as quickly as possible, so that we can ensure them that they are certainly expected to follow the law. They're certainly expected to follow our policies, and that is our expectation within the district, that students' grades are a reflection of what they have learned and are able to demonstrate.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to ask the first question, and that is...
Can I just say something
Yes.
before we start questions? And I want to thank Councilmember Grasso, who's noticed a hearing, I think on February the 8th. And so I know that there will be a lot of questions around the investigation, and the chancellor and, of course, the superintendent will be available at the hearing to focus on that. And we are certainly prepared today to drill down on how DCPS moves forward.
I'm going to ask the first question, which is real short. On the 5th or 9th slide, implement end-of-course assessments will be in place by 2022. Is that the fall of 2021?
Yes.
Mr. Grasso.
Thank you, and thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Superintendent. First, I just want to note, so everyone's aware of it, the role that I play as the chair of the Committee on Education is something that I take very seriously and this matter is something that we've been investigating and will continue to investigate as we move forward. And I think it's important that everybody understand that on February 8th we are having this hearing that will dig deep into this. I thought that it would give us a week of time for all of us to really digest what's in these reports, understand what's going on, and then come and put it on the record. That hearing is going to be government witnesses only, so that we will have as much time as we need in order to really investigate what's going on the record, talk about the next steps moving forward. I also want to note that the Committee on Education and the Council since 2007 has had the responsibility of oversight in this area, and we have, I think, also an obligation to admit where we haven't done as much as we can do, but also to talk about how we're going to move forward and do a better job of oversight in the education sector. And I think that'll come out in the February 8th hearing, where we will be exploring how the committee can do even a better job than what we've done. We have focused, and I think it's important to note this, that we have focused on the kinds of things that impact a student's attendance from the first day that I came on the council. And Mr. Chairman, you have worked on it for much longer than that. And this is not something that is easy to solve. It is also not something that's new to the District of Columbia. This is something that the elected school board was dealing with, and I have a long record of that as well, where they were unable to figure out exactly what the best solution was. So I look forward actually to the opportunity for us to work together to get to the solutions that we need to get to, so that students feel like school is the best option every morning when they get up. And that's the challenge that we have before us, is how do we instill a love of learning and welcome students into the classroom and make school a place where they want to be. And I think we have a long way to go on that. And I'm sorry that that's the case, but I think it's time for us to all roll our sleeves up and really concentrate on what does it really mean to love a student and to show that love and to support a student. And what's remarkable is that there are wonderful examples throughout the District of Columbia where this is the case. And I do want to highlight one school today that came out in the report that many of you know about. I know it's an application school, but McKinley Tech is a school that is an application school but takes in just about every student that expresses an interest in STEM and expresses an interest in learning, and their numbers are pretty good. And that's because they've shown a commitment to these students and shown them love and shown them the opportunity to learn exists at that school. So I am, of course, prepared to work with all of my colleagues. I'm prepared to work with the administration, and we will continue the hearing that we had on December 15th on February 8th, and it will go for as long as it takes for everybody to ask their questions on the record, and we will come up with some recommendations and some solutions on how we can do our job better as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilmember McDuffie? No.
I want to thank the superintendent and chancellor for the reports. I was at the mayor's press conference when she announced it yesterday, and sort of appreciated the renewed commitment to address some of these issues, and I appreciate how long-standing some of these issues have been within the system. I want to thank Councilman Grasso for the work that he's doing, and look forward to the hearing next month. I did want to highlight, there are a few schools mentioned in Ward 5 in particular, and McKinley, as Councilman Grasso mentioned, was really mentioned in a good light. And so I think it's great. It's important that we highlight the positives, even in sort of the context of some of the more serious challenges that came out from the report yesterday. And so I do want to thank you all for, Councilman Grasso in particular, for recognizing McKinley, as well as some of the other schools like Banneker and School Without Walls that are both all application schools. But Luke Seymour, I think 87% of Luke Seymour students graduate in violation of DCPS's attendance policy, which is a challenge, and it's deeply concerning to me. Also, Dunbar, you mentioned in your remarks that there were more than 4,000 changes were made to attendance records of 118 graduates at Dunbar. And that's for the 2016-2017 school year. I guess my question is it reasonable to infer that if this was happening in the 2016-2017 school year on such a widespread level, that it was occurring at least at the beginning of the 2017-2018 school year, at least until the investigation began, and perhaps folks got wind of what was happening and they changed the practice. So what's being done, what has been done to look at whether or not this has impacted students in the 2017-2018 school year at Dunbar and Luke Seymour, and what, if anything, you all are doing to try to address that before it gets to the point where people perhaps students graduate in violation of the policy?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to talk about those schools separately, if you will, because it's two different situations. Relates to
Microphone,
Dunbar.
Chancellor, microphone. Okay, I'm sorry.
As it relates to Dunbar High School, I think that it's very likely, not just this year, beginning of this year, last year, and prior years, that this has been happening. And this goes back to, in terms of the ability to identify it, our student information system does not provide schools information at this level. Schools have to go in, teachers, school leaders have to go in and look at it themselves and go pull out data and so on and so forth. So it's very likely that it's been happening, and that's what the investigation is revealing, that it has been. Luke Seymour took on...
Can I stop you for 1 second, Chance, before you move on to Dunbar? And just let me know if there's an ongoing investigation to which you can't talk about.
Let me just say this. We've concluded our investigation. Okay. The Chancellor said at the outset that the DCPS staff is reviewing with our current 12th graders and their families, and there will continue to be opportunities to do so where they stand and where they are. And if we are able, and I think from the central office, they can also determine if there were anomalies in the attendance records at any school.
And you have any time frame for when you expect to have a sense for it?
You're already reviewing the 2017 graduates, and additionally, in February, we're going to have in-school resource fairs where not only graduates and families will have the opportunity to interact with school personnel to find out where the 12th graders are. We will bring additional citywide resources to the school, including, if kids need help with Medicaid enrollment, if they need help with with child care, the family needs help with child care. We expect to be able to make immediate matches. We want to understand if young people need help with after-school employment and the like, and if they need additional tutoring help. So we hope to stand those things up in February at our comprehensive schools or anywhere else where we see significant need.
And then the Luke Seymour.
Yeah, Luke Seymour, like Washington Met, like Roosevelt State, like Balloon, by definition took kids in who had attendance issues. So it's like saying at the hospital we find sick people. They are behind. That's who they enrolled. They enroll them all year, and then they implement a program that allows students to work at their own pace. Some take longer, some go faster, and when they complete the assignments, they're allowed to move on to the next piece. So we don't have worksheets and packets and things of that nature. We have implemented a program using the ability to pursue competency-based learning at our Opportunity Academies, and that's the program at Luke Seymour. Luke Seymour's graduation rate is amongst the lowest in the district because they have such large numbers of students who are 2-3 years behind, and many times on their second, third, or fourth school in terms of graduation. And so I think if you were to, I believe Councilmember Grouse was going to do this, reach out to the Alvarez and Marshall, they will share the same thing in terms of the difference between these types of schools.
Just to be clear that everyone understands what you mean by opportunity schools, Chancellor.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Madam Mayor. The opportunity schools are, people refer to them as alternative schools. We move away from the term alternative because oftentimes it's used to cast a negative aspersion on the child. And in DCPS, we have decided that it's extremely important to provide students an opportunity even after they've not been successful at a traditional high school. And every time when they come into an Opportunity Academy, a student has already accumulated a large number of absences, and they are also significantly behind in credits.
The 4,000 changes at Dunbar, was that changes of any kind, which could be one period or entire day?
It was looking at period level attendance, so it was for a specific period where a student was marked absent and that record was later changed to present.
So if that happened 5 times in one day, that would be 5?
Correct.
Councilmember Treon, Mike?
I guess this is kind of a follow-up to Councilmember McDuffie's concern as it relates to those young people, because there's a rule, a 10-day rule and a 30-day rule. If you miss a certain amount of days, you fail that class, correct?
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure out if that is true. A lot of times when we don't enforce a policy, when it becomes public, we start enforcing, and as a result, we're pretty much in February for those children who have missed a certain amount of days in that class. How do we plan on dealing with the morale, the wraparound services, anticipating the dropout rate? Because if you miss that amount of class for half a year, the chance of completing that grade on time, you have to do something to catch up. And that's my first question. How are we anticipating that population who may have those chronic absences or missed a day?
Yeah, so a few things. One is student can fail a quarter or an advisory, as we call it, and still pass the class. So if I can have earned an F first quarter and still pass the class over the course of the year. So
you saying take the class again or take it?
If the student failed first quarter, they're still enrolled in the class. It's not impossible to still pass the class for the year because it's a year-long. Most of these courses are year-long courses. That's one. But if a student failed, then we have opportunities for students to retake the course, and that's part of what we were sharing in terms of working with the 2018 graduates, working with them to make sure that they're enrolled in the correct class. That includes the class they need to continue to graduate, in terms of graduating, but also making up classes for past failures. Now, what I would offer, council member, is our students knew they were supposed to be in school. And I equate this to getting away with speeding over and over and over, and then finally you get caught. It was completely inappropriate to say, well, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be speeding. Our students knew they were supposed to be there. What we are focused on now is making sure that the students get enrolled in the additional courses. We still offer opportunities for students to make up classes after school.
Can I ask a question for clarity? Yes. So if Jane Doe got an A in that class and it's found that she missed a certain amount of days, would that grade be changed to a failing grade on her transcript? Or
It depends on the advisor. So it depends on the quarter. So if Jane Doe failed first quarter, she would get an FA for first quarter. Let's say it's algebra.
So she
1.
had an A on or B on a report card that then be changed to reflect the attendance.
So she wouldn't have gotten a report card until just now. The report cards are coming out now. We began to communicate.
This is our second report card, though, correct?
Correct.
Right.
So let's start back at the beginning of the year, first quarter. Jane Doe failed algebra first quarter. She would receive an FA, failure due to attendance. But algebra is a year-long course. So if second quarter she began to come to school, she could still pass the algebra course. But let's say she failed second quarter as well. She'll need to make up the first semester of Algebra 1. She still has an opportunity to pass second semester of Algebra 1. So right now, it would be time to make sure that Jane Doe knows you need to retake the first semester of Algebra 1. We have opportunities after school, we have opportunities in summer school, and we are there to enroll. Some of the students will be able to retake it during the day.
That sound like a heavy lift on behalf of DCPS to try to go back and do that. Are we prepared to round all these children up and have that whole thing set up? Because that sounds like additional. Because one year in DC, a few years ago, 40% of ninth graders failed the ninth grade, and so there was additional setup of that cohort of students that had to do something different than the other group of students. Are we prepared to handle something that massive? As we see, I guess it's like 800, 900 kids passed last year that weren't supposed to pass.
Well, what we will do is we want to make sure, Council Member, that we give students every opportunity to make up the courses that they need. Some of the students are going to need to come to summer school. And then we will do what should always be done, and that is that if the student continues to fail or continues to need support, that we can invite them back the following year to continue. So we are prepared to make sure students get the classes that they need, and then if they need additional time, we're prepared to offer that as well.
I don't mean to take up a lot of time, but some of the classes are half a year, and you got to consider if they're taking that class again, the pile up amount of students in one class for a group of students that may fill the same class. Because last year, the issue of Baloo, we had a lot of teachers absent, so there was a lot of overcrowding. And so I'm anticipating a lot of overcrowding in classrooms that may have to overlap. You thinking the same thing? Or am I off?
I think that what schools are going to have to do, and having been a principal in other districts, this is something we would deal with regularly. You would look at your first semester, you build your master schedule for the year, students would fail, you would reconfigure your master schedule, offer additional sections of classes that students need so that you didn't overpopulate any one particular class, and then you would also assign students to the credit catch-up opportunities through credit recovery. Many times that's after school or taking advantage of Saturdays, so on and so forth, so that students get an opportunity to retake it. But there will be some students who never had a chance to graduate this year. For instance, we're at Baloo, 37%, 36% of the students didn't graduate last year using these policies. They came into the year mathematically impossible to graduate. And then there will be a few students who were absolutely possible and they failed first semester. Those students will be given an opportunity to retake, and we're going to work with all of them to make sure they get every opportunity to retake it. I think that for me, what I want to make sure of is that when they leave here, if they do fail, that they learn the lesson here, that you will earn the grade that you get. We will be available to help you, and if you need additional time to do so, it's okay.
And may I just add, Council Member, the issue that you raised is a good one, and it's a good problem for us to be. We would love to have that problem, oversubscription at the classes, and that is something that our team will be ready to address. Let me just also say that a number of the policy violations that were outlined in the report have to do with the credit recovery that the Chancellor just mentioned. So teachers or administrators identified that the young people needed an opportunity to retake a class, and then but there are also attendance requirements in credit recovery. So we have to be mindful of that as well as we set this up, that we will have some obligations to meet to make sure that the young people are accommodated, but students and families also have to be able to meet the attendance requirements if they are offered a credit recovery opportunity. So we should just keep that in mind.
I want to thank Chancellor for your leadership and being workable. Worked with a few chancellors over the years and hasn't been as friendly as you, so thank you for working with our office as it relates to these matters.
Absolutely, thank you.
Councilmember Che.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I really appreciate, your team getting involved in this and pursuing it so vigorously and reporting on it. But I have to say something more generally, if you permit me. This is not just about absenteeism or sort of finagling the numbers about absenteeism. It is certainly about that, but I think it's about much more than that. First of all, in terms of data and how it's reported, again, it's not just fudging numbers, but it's also misleading presentations over the years. I'll just give you one example. The PARCC scores in one school were very low because the students were blowing it off and not taking the tests. And then the next year they were encouraged to take the test, and they took the test, and the scores were really good. So the announcement was, look at this extraordinary improvement, with the baseline being that anomalous year when they weren't participating. That's misleading, okay? That's part of this problem as well. So there's there's fooling around with numbers, straight up. There's presenting information in a misleading way, and sometimes the information is founded on data underneath it that's not reliable. I remember once when students were coming before the council and they were reading their testimony, and they were middle school or high school and they could hardly read. And then one of the council members asked, well, how are you doing in school? Well, I'm getting all A's and B's. There was no way that those students could be earning A's and B's as they're being pushed through and moved through. So then at the end of the day, even if they're in a course, they weren't absent, they got an A or they got a B, it wasn't a real A or B. So the business about information and how it's presented and what we really know about what's being presented, I think needs a lot of work. Another thing is the culture about complaints within schools. I hear from people, and even in this particular instance, the issue about absenteeism, that people were reporting issues about changing grades or changing attendance and changing this and changing that, and they were pretty much ignored. But I also hear that more generally. I'll have teachers or principals or someone who will whisper to me in the hallway about this, that, or the other thing. They don't want to rock the boat because the culture, it's almost totalitarian from the central office. They don't want to stick their neck out. They feel, maybe they're not correct, but they certainly feel that there will be reprisals and that they just have to be quiet and, stay in line. So I think we need to work on that culture. And just generally, the system itself seems to be chasing or excessively chasing the wrong goals. The goals seem to be to present numbers to the public. Kumbaya, our attendance rates are up, our graduation rates are up, our suspensions are down, and it's all on the upswing. But either it's founded on information that is not reliable, or it's fudged, or that's what you're aiming at. What we really need to be aiming at, and I'm grateful for what you were saying and some of this information here, we want to make sure that we're graduating students who are actually competent. I had someone come before me on a hearing. It was unrelated, but it turns out that he was in the nonprofit business of giving remedial education to adults, people who were functionally illiterate. And I asked how many of his students had high school diplomas from the District of Columbia. He said, I think all of them, most of them. That cannot be so. We cannot be graduating students who are functionally illiterate, and we are. And no one here can sit and tell me that we are not. So we have to start, I think, looking more at the system. And then, what I heard about all this absenteeism was a bit demoralizing because we're not taking that larger view overall. And what we're doing is we're absolving the central office, okay? In these materials, we're going to train the teachers, we're going to train the principals. Weren't there memos signaling or even saying that they got to keep those graduation rates up? That their ability to succeed in the system would be judged in part by that? What message does that send to them? Maybe we need training of the principals and the teachers and the people in the central office, I think.
Well, let me
No, I want to make one final point. And then we absolve the whole system itself. And it's the system with its emphasis in the wrong place, I believe, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. What we need to achieve is assurance, which is why I do like some of the things that are in this, that we will graduate people who are competent to go to school or be in the workplace. And we have to identify it well before senior year, well before even high school. So I would ask, please, can we be open to looking at the system, looking at the central office, and looking at these larger questions and working on absenteeism? Because this is not just about absenteeism. Okay.
If there's not a response, I'll turn to Councilmember Silverman.
I will say this, and I agree with you, and I said at the outset, this isn't just about absenteeism or the things that DCPS could have done better. It's also about how we as a community are making sure that our kids are at school and raising expectations for what it means once they get in school. I also would like to say, Mary, we will do everything possible to make sure our staff in schools have the appropriate outlets if they think something is happening that is wrong. I in no way, and this should be clear for all the 33,000 people that I have the privilege to lead, our accountability systems are meant to attract and retain the best teachers. They are not meant to be used by any one principal or administrator to intimidate or strike fear in the professionals who are teaching our young people. So we will do everything in our power to be sure that that is clear. The Chancellor will put in place a function that gets directly to the Chancellor. So it's not going through the labor union process where complaints are made, which is where some of these complaints came. And, to be also helpful, some complaints sometimes come in front of the council during oversight, and that's one way to get it, but we also want to make sure that information is getting directly to the Chancellor so that they can do something about it, and that's been missing. So we need to have a way where a teacher or anybody else in the building sees something that is not right, because we know that happened. They will also have a place to go for that. Chancellor Wilson is very focused, as you mentioned, as is on the screen now, at being able to test what our kids know, and we will look forward to working that into our regime as well.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to add just a little bit as well. I really appreciate the comments because it speaks so much to what I believe. I mean, I had a good fortune of being in two types of educational systems. One that did not meet the expectations that my mother had for me, and the other that did. And I know what it's like to be in schools and be pushed. I know what it's like to be around students who need additional support and they receive it. And I know what it's like to be a student who is exposed to a lot of variety in their educational experiences, as a matter of fact. And I decided to get into education because I believe that all children deserve that. And I'm committed to ensuring that all our students here in D.C. get what they deserve, which is the opportunity to know that they are privileged for growing up in D.C. and having attended our schools. And so when these types of things happen, I do get extremely upset and extremely frustrated. I talk to several teachers and principals. They reach out to me directly. They're normally surprised when it's me on the other end of the line, calling them back about a complaint, intimidation, or anything like that, because it's not something that I condone. I can't support that because, as the mayor mentioned, the point of impact, the point of the evaluation is on growth and development. And it is true that we have some leaders who don't understand that. And I want to make sure that they understand that is not acceptable. They will not get to be a leader here. Yes, we want to make sure that we develop a system where students are likely to graduate. We'd like to develop a system where students and people feel responsible for helping students reach their full potential, but we want to make sure they know what that means. That is that they are prepared, they are competent. There shouldn't be students who make it out of the system who cannot read. It's one of the reasons why we pointed to a K-2 literacy. We said they must be able to read coming out of kindergarten through second grade. It's unacceptable when I go into a school and hear them explaining that away. So I just commit to this council, to the mayor, to the city, that we will do everything we can as a district. We want our culture to be one where people are excited to send their children, that they're excited to come and learn, and they know they're going to be supported. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Silverman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to associate myself with Mary's remarks, and my questions build upon what she just said. First, I do want to commend OSSI and the superintendent for making the report public and the findings and recommendations public. I know there are a lot of parents who spent a lot of time last night looking at the report, as did I. So a few questions. I think there are three things that were very striking to me about the report. Number one, that we have, I'm not really sure what central office does, I guess is the best way to put it. Because we have regulations, and I talked with the deputy mayor about this last night, that should get turned into policies that should then be implemented in the classroom. And I agree with Mary. I think what is really disturbing to me is something as fundamental as attendance policy wasn't followed. So it makes me question what other fundamental issues in school that we put regulations in place are not being followed, because it seems like what Alvarez and Marcel found is there's no oversight mechanism at the central office. So I guess my first question is a larger structural question, which is, attendance is one example. Are there other fundamental issues that we do not see oversight and implementation of? If you follow what I'm saying. So the first issue is, are we going to review all the policies that should be in place and how they're being implemented, and what is the mechanism at central office to do that? I'll just lay them all out. The second is this whatever it takes mentality. It gets at the cultural issue that Mary mentioned. What is striking in the report that several teachers mentioned, and I think Dunbar is really the biggest example, there is this whatever it takes mentality to show good results. And that is highly disturbing. And I think what is really devastating about this report is it impacts the credibility of a DCPS diploma. It really does. And I think that's devastating for our students. It's devastating for our city. I mean, as a labor chair, I hear this all the time from employers. That the example Mary cited was actually, it was someone from SUM that does adult education. And, I have to tell you, I was just at one of our adult charter schools this weekend where people were really working hard to get their GED, and a lot of them are DCPS graduates. But this whatever it takes mentality, I didn't see too much in the presentation about how are we going to get at this cultural issue. The third thing is then how do we assist those that don't come to school? So I know that Chairman Grasso and Mr. Mendelson, I know that Phil has been working on the truancy issue for years, and it is a tough one. But as I said at the Blue hearing, my concern is, once again, as labor chair, hearing from our employers that the biggest obstacle to people being hired and staying at a job is coming to work on time. And I just see the connection between what's going on in our schools and that issue, what employers call the soft skills or essential life skills. So what are we doing to intervene? And I'll just end by saying we actually have a Luke Seymour student in our office right now. He won a great competition for talking actually about gentrification and how it impacts the district, and I thought he was just a fabulous student who needed a chance. So if anyone's interested in talking to a Luke Seymour student, there's one right here who would be happy to tell you about what it's like to be at an opportunity school. And I think that's just an example of, but things like coming to work on time, knowing how to interact in this type of environment, or things that he is going to work on, and we want to work on with him. So thank you for releasing the report, but I really think we need to focus on these structural and cultural issues very swiftly.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember.
We have a line up. Robert White, and Anita, you'll be the last person.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor, Chancellor, and Superintendent for your urgency on these issues, and thank you to Chairman Grasso for his attention to these issues as well. We don't have reliable data on attendance to let us know if attendance is increasing, decreasing, or staying stable, because we know from at least the OSSI report that there were alterations to attendance records, but we do know just based on the reported number of students with excessive absences who graduated that we do have a very serious attendance problem getting kids to school. What we don't know is how we solve that issue. This study, or these studies and their recommendations, are really geared toward compliance and consistency across schools, and so they are a solution to, I would say, symptoms, and not a solution to the underlying problems, and that worries me. This grading scandal is an indication that at least one aspect of our education strategy has backfired, and we have to go back and correct it. We also know, looking at the achievement gap between white and black students and between white and Latino students, that we have not closed the achievement gap in the past years, and it remains far below what we expected. And this is a significant and terrifying shortfall. And so what I would say is that we have to make sure that we pivot from here to the real issues, and not finish this conversation by focusing just on the symptoms. And so I will be asking a number of questions that are really geared toward the symptoms at our oversight hearing, and I will do my best to get you the questions ahead of time, just so you can anticipate the types of questions that I'm going to ask. But one specific question about this report that we're looking at today is, if high school principals across the district were graduating significant numbers of students who have not met requirements, then doesn't it stand to reason that there was a directive to do so, either explicitly or implicitly?
What I would say is this, and just going back to the prior council member's question as well, we have a lot of things in DCPS that work. Okay, we could name them in terms of several improvements, several offices that work. We had an office that relates to, in our chief of schools office, relates to secondary, that saw an issue around the district not addressing attendance in its grading, and put forth a policy to try to improve it. What we know is that policy did not come with great training. As a matter of fact, I have gone back, I have looked at what was shared with school leaders. It was completely insufficient. So that was part of the issue. And then for our school leaders last year, there was a communication. And that was it. So I think that what you have is a situation where you have individuals who, one, were poorly communicated with. Some weren't even aware at the teacher level of the policy. So it depended upon the school leader proactively sharing the information. And that's not the way we need to behave as a district. In a policy as important as this, we need to get information directly to our teachers. Now, getting to the underlying question around culture and intimidation, I do believe that when you don't explicitly talk about what the expectations are, when you don't explicitly have protocols in to check, to create outlets for people to speak directly to the top leadership around where their challenges are, then it can create circumstances where those individuals who might be inclined to chase numbers, particularly given that there are goals and expectations around improvement, to do the wrong thing. And that's why I spend so much time in schools. That's why I hold faculty meetings directly with faculty. That's why I ask them questions about what's working, what's not. I've had faculty members be very vulnerable with me. I thank them on the spot in front of everyone, and then we follow up and we say we're going to what we're going to do to help them, and then I make it clear about what they should do if they feel any type of retaliation. Now, to go further, as the mayor mentioned, we recognize we need to have an office with that function that reports directly to me, and the rest of it I'll wait for the hearing to share, because we are very much focused on the whole thing within our strategic plan, and we'd be happy to talk about some specifics at that time.
Councilmember Bonds, you're the last person.
Yes, this morning I really want to thank my colleagues and certainly thank what I call our school system and its representatives, because one of the things that we've done is we've opened the turnip, so to speak. We're at a point where we recognize that there are many issues that we need to deal with. We want to have a world-class education system, and we want that because we want to take care of our young people. We want to have prosperity for everyone, but most importantly, we want our community to survive and to thrive. And in order to do that, we have to start with our education system and how it is laid out. I appreciate what Mary said. I think she pushed us to the point of recognizing that this is more about the overall and taking this opportunity to look at the systems that we have put in place and whether or not they are working for today's Washington, D.C. So I'm really excited about this and looking forward to the hearing. But I must say that I am intrigued that we are at this point because, you know, I've lived here all of my life. And through that, there was a time where some of us remember, we would say 40 years of dysfunctional educational system. And we're coming out of that, and we're coming out of that. And we've been coming out of it for many years. My point is that we have reached the crescendo where we must come out of it if we are to survive. We have young people who, yes, can't get a job, who are not, qualified to get a job because they don't read. There are many adults like that. We also have these individuals who cannot navigate the system to get housing, cannot navigate the system to move forward. So there are some people who, by their age, are stuck in this system that we thought was educating and giving them an opportunity. So now we discovered that we're still in this phase where we're not able to give our people the opportunities that they need. And so I'm excited that this is an opportunity for us here and now. And I thank the mayor for really pushing this. She didn't have to put it out there so glaringly to us that we need to look at our education system and design it in such a fashion, even if it's a slow process. But we really need to give more attention to what we're doing to educate our young people and to move the ball forward, which will then continue to move the district forward. We can't just have, as I once said to colleague, council member, former Mayor Gray, we just can't have cranes in the air. We've got to have boots on the ground, and on the ground means with our young people. So that's just my thought, and I just had to share it. And thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. If I just might make a concluding statement, and I thank you, Council Member, for that statement. But I want to be clear. It is. We very much were committed to putting out the news, the good, the bad, or the ugly. None of us around this table who have been very committed to the transformation of our schools wins with fake numbers. And certainly our children don't win with fake numbers. And that is my commitment to make sure we know that when we present information, and even to your point, Mary, when we present the numbers and when we talk about the numbers, that everybody has a true reflection of what we've been able to learn. But let's make no mistake about it. We're in a very different place with our public schools than we have been in the recent history of public education in our city. Our parents continue to choose public education in our city. We've made significant improvements and investments in our lower grades, and we're seeing the benefits of that. We've made some difficult decisions, too, so that we would have a more accurate reflection of what young people know when they come out of our schools. One such decision was to move to the PARCC assessment. Many states haven't moved to the PARCC assessment. We were using DC CAS. We were recognizing that it wasn't a true reflection of what young people know, so we moved to PARCC. Even this grading policy is a reflection of us raising the bar on ourselves. The absence, to the council member's point, the absence rules are set in the DCMR, and they were put in DCMR in 1993. It's just that the system had never translated those DCMR provisions into a policy for our schools. So we put the attention on attendance, and it needs to be on attendance. The last thing I will say is that we have highlighted some violations related to attendance over the last year. We don't think that that's a new phenomenon. We think that we have begun to accurately portray what is happening. But we should also not take away, and I'm a little concerned about some of the kind of anecdotal comments that have been made about what our young people know when they come out of our schools. So let's be careful about that. The significant majority of our students didn't graduate with these attendance violations. A significant number of our students are going on to college and career and are doing quite well and are raising families. So let us continue to focus on all the things that we can do as a city. But I also don't want us to leave this conversation thinking that the government can do it all. All right? The government and the taxpayers of Washington, D.C. over the last 10 years have made huge investments in transforming our schools, the buildings, investments in our teachers, creative and innovative programs that are attracting families from pre-K 3 all the way through UDC. So we now have to focus, and I think a number of you have said, we're dealing with the kind of the bureaucratic problems that we've created, but why aren't kids coming to school? We can fix all of that and still have an attendance problem. And so we are committed to all of the policy changes that we can have and all of the work that we can do with DC families to, like the chancellor said, and I'll just say, I can't imagine being not having the expectation when I grew up of going to school and doing well in school and seeing the value of school as being the only really way to change my conditions. Now, I was incredibly blessed, and many of our young people don't have that. So if we don't have it in the family, we have to find a way to recreate it in the community. Thank you very much. I think that, Mr. Chairman, completes our agenda.
I think it does, and we're 25 minutes over.
All right. Sorry about that. Bye.